Hello, everyone. Welcome to Kudlow. I'm Larry Kudlow. So as we speak, President Joe Biden is on a plane to Brussels for an incredibly important NATO meeting and a G7 meeting to deal with the Russian war in Ukraine. For this incredibly important set of meetings, Joe Biden has to be an incredibly strong American president. He must lead. He must not be afraid to call out Vladimir Putin as a war criminal who is committing crimes against humanity and, as such, should be tried by the International Criminal Court in The Hague, Netherlands. Regardless of the outcome of the Ukraine war, he should be tried as a war criminal. Remember, Reagan called the old communist Soviet Union the evil empire. He said, tear down this wall. He said the only option was we win, they lose. Communicating toughness and victory is something Joe Biden has never done. But it's never too late to start. I mean, I believe Big West is right, that the economic sanctions should never be lifted until Putin is gone as the Russian leader. I also think Biden should make it clear that the United States and its NATO allies want the Ukrainians to win this war. Biden has never said that. I don't think any of the NATO or G7 leaders have said that. But I will bet Americans and American voters want the Ukraine to win the war and want Russia to lose the war. Now, there's a growing feeling that the Biden administration strategy instead is to pursue some kind of standoff or stalling in the Ukraine. That's the strategy to contain Russia, not to defeat Russia. If Biden is truly the leader of the forces of democracy and freedom, he should make it very clear to Putin and the rest of the world, we win, you lose. And Biden and all NATO should make a renewed push to accommodate President Zelensky's request for as many weapons as he needs, carte blanche on weaponry, Soviet MiGs, anti-aircraft, anti-tanks, anti-ships, all of it. Nobody wants troops on the ground. But remember, this business about offensive versus defensive weapons is a lot of baloney. It was Putin who invaded Ukraine. It is Zelensky and the brave Ukrainians who are defending their country. Therefore, all forms of assistance to Ukraine are, by the very nature of this conflict, defensive. This idea that we will somehow make Putin angry is just utter wimpy, wussy nonsense. The guy's not angry. He's mad. He's a criminal. It is he who has escalated. It is the West who is defending. Arbitrary distinctions among weapons does not hold up in the face of rigorous logic or analysis. Biden should make it very clear to the world that we will come down on Putin's head if he dares engage in chemical or biological weapons. No military responses should be taken off the table in the event Putin ever dared to go down that route. And on the economic front, the sanctions have to be toughened. It's time to put the screws to Russia's oil and gas sales. In a few moments, we will talk to Senator Pat Toomey, who has correctly pointed out that the sanctions imposed by the U.S. and Europe purposely allow Russia to continue exporting oil and gas, between $5 to $7 billion worth in hard currency funds to finance Putin's war machine each week. Each week. In fact, we know Europe has actually increased its imports of Russian energy, as has India and China. Senator Toomey calls for secondary sanctions on the entire Russia banking sector. These penalties would prohibit foreign banks anywhere in the world from making payments to Russian banks, including oil and gas, this under the threat of U.S. sanctions. As Mr. Toomey puts it bluntly, do business with the U.S. or do business with Russia, but you can't do both. Also, as Wall Street Journal columnist Holman Jenkins has suggested, set up an escrow account. So if Europeans buy Russian energy and pay for it in euros or dollars or anything else, it won't go to Russia. It'll go into this special escrow account. Putin won't like that. But if he doesn't want to sell his energy on that basis, then he can go ahead and cap his oil and gas wells. Fine, cap it. I'll just put him out of commission for years, because reopening a mine or well is very difficult and expensive proposition. And I also see today's news reports that Republicans and Democrats in the Senate and the House are now proposing secondary sanctions on any American entities knowingly buying or selling Russian gold, which is estimated to be worth $132 billion. This would also stop banks in China and India. I'm sure my list of proposed actions at the NATO meeting is incomplete. But to me, the most important thing is for Joe Biden to truly act like the leader of the free world. He must make it plain that Putin is a criminal, that the Russian system of authoritarian, statist, virtually totalitarian society with its puny, centrally controlled economy and its lack of freedom of speech or anything else for its citizenry is wrong. That's right. The Russian model is wrong. It should be consigned to the dustbin of history. Come on, Mr. Biden. Come on, Mr. Biden. We win. They lose. Just say it.